A woman walked into a public assistance office in Brooklyn carrying a Columbia University Master of Business Administration degree tucked inside her worn leather tote bag, her 5-year-old daughter holding her hand tightly. The intake worker behind the scratched acrylic partition did not glance up at her street address, did not comment on her zero-income status, and did not pause at the 4-month employment gap listed on the second page. But when her fingers turned to page 3 of the verification file, her hands stopped moving completely. Her eyes widened behind silver-framed reading glasses. Because what was documented in those typed rows did not simply explain how Nia Vance ended up sitting on a scuffed blue plastic chair, filling out forms for emergency food assistance. It exposed a quiet financial destruction that had dismantled a human life piece by piece over 3 long years. 35-year-old Nia Vance had once been the kind of professional featured in alumni quarterlies and investment firm press releases. She possessed a Master of Business Administration from Columbia Business School, graduating in the top 4% of her class, with a concentration in quantitative asset management. She was the kind of analyst who made senior partners stop side conversations during morning briefings, because her risk assessments were always razor sharp. For nearly 6 years, Nia lived that reality every single day. By 31, she was a vice president of portfolio analysis at a boutique investment firm on Wall Street, occupying a corner office on the 34th floor overlooking the Hudson River. Floor-to-ceiling glass windows caught the morning sunlight like a silent promise that hard work always yielded permanence. Her annual compensation reached $210,000, including performance bonuses. Her apartment in Park Slope featured restored exposed brick and hardwood floors that clicked softly whenever she walked across them in tailored heels. Custom silk blazers hung in a closet organized meticulously by shade and season. A polished brass desk plaque near her computer read Nia Vance, MBA, and every morning when she sat down, she touched the cool metallic edge with her thumb like a silent ritual of gratitude. She smelled of dark roast espresso and quiet determination. The high-end espresso machine in the corporate kitchen hummed continuously, and Nia always kept a steaming ceramic mug beside her dual monitors. Her daily bag held a leather-bound notebook, financial models thick enough to anchor a ship, and a vintage metal calculator her grandmother had given her when she passed her graduate entrance exams. Her grandmother, Gwendolyn Vance, had raised Nia in a small 2-bedroom apartment in South Philadelphia after her parents passed away in an automobile accident. Gwendolyn worked 32 years as a sanitation laborer at a regional hospital, spending her nights scrubbing linoleum floors and her afternoons quizzing young Nia on algebra problems at the Formica kitchen table. She had hands permanently scarred by industrial detergents and a soft melodic voice that sounded like Sunday morning choir rehearsals. Gwendolyn carried a single core belief that she repeated like an unbroken promise throughout Nia's childhood. One short sentence she etched into the girl's mind before Nia even understood what corporate boardrooms were. Knowledge is the one asset nobody can repossess from you, baby. Not a landlord, not a bank, not a system that looks right through you. Nia carried that sentence like forged armor through late-night study sessions on a refurbished laptop, through undergraduate finals where she survived on instant soup, and through high-stakes investment committee meetings where she was frequently the only black woman at the mahogany table. Gwendolyn's voice had been her compass, her shield, her absolute proof that disciplined effort would eventually secure an unshakable foundation. And for a long time, the world seemed to honor that promise. Nia specialized in institutional risk assessment, specifically evaluating how hidden liabilities could collapse seemingly stable commercial entities. She possessed a rare talent for spotting financial discrepancies buried beneath layers of corporate restructuring. She could identify a predatory loan agreement from 40 feet across a conference room. She simply failed to spot one across her own kitchen counter. Marcus Vance entered her life like an unstoppable force. He was charismatic, polished, and possessed the kind of effortless warmth that made entire rooms shift their attention the moment he stepped through a doorway. He was 38 when they met, a senior director at a commercial real estate development firm, managing properties across New York and New Jersey. Tall, impeccably tailored, with a smile that suggested he had never encountered an obstacle he could not negotiate around. They met at a fundraising gala for urban youth education programs in Manhattan. Marcus wrote a personal check for $8,500 that night without hesitation. Nia watched him sign the slip and felt a profound sense of security. She believed she was looking at a partner who shared her commitment to stewardship and growth. She was wrong, though the truth would remain hidden beneath layers of affection for years. They married 18 months later at a quiet ceremony in upstate New York. A 3-carat platinum ring, a quiet honeymoon in Maine, and a heartfelt toast where Marcus declared before 80 guests that his highest priority was protecting her happiness forever. Everyone applauded. Everyone believed him. Nia believed him most of all. The first subtle shift was wrapped in the language of devotion. 4 months after the wedding, Marcus suggested consolidating their accounts to streamline their long-term investment strategy. "You spend 60 hours a week analyzing corporate balance sheets for clients, baby," he said one evening while clearing the dinner plates. "You are brilliant at what you do. Let me handle our domestic accounts and investment vehicles so you can save your energy for your career." It sounded like consideration. It felt like genuine partnership. Nia, a woman who spent her professional life analyzing complex legal structures, handed over management of their joint accounts without a trace of suspicion. When you reside inside the house, you rarely inspect the foundation beams. Her grandmother's voice echoed gently in the back of her consciousness. Knowledge protects your future, baby. Nia held on to that belief because she possessed the credentials, the high-earning career, and the analytical mind. What she lacked was the cold realization that the man sharing her bed was systematically dismantling her financial existence one transaction at a time. When their daughter Chloe was born, Nia took an extended leave from her firm. 6 months stretched into 2 years as Chloe developed mild respiratory complications that required constant home care and specialized medical appointments. It was a period of intense devotion, quiet sleeplessness, and the overwhelming, beautiful weight of early motherhood. It was also a period where Nia did not open a single bank application, did not audit a joint tax filing, and did not notice that her name was being methodically removed from primary asset deeds. Marcus did not yell. He did not raise his hand. He never threw object or spoke in harsh tones. He simply moved decimal points on balance sheets and altered signature lines on digital forms. He opened 3 corporate lines of credit using Nia's personal credit history, eventually accumulating $63,500 in defaulted obligations she knew nothing about. He liquidated stock options that had been issued in her name during her Wall Street tenure. He transferred title ownership of their Park Slope property into a private family trust where she held 0 voting rights. By the time Chloe spoke her first complete sentence, Nia's credit score had collapsed by 380 points, and her individual liquid reserves were completely gone. Her grandmother's words returned like a distant echo. "Knowledge protects you," but academic knowledge had failed to protect Nia from the quietest form of domestic destruction. The discovery occurred on an ordinary Thursday afternoon. Chloe was 5 years old, playing quietly with wooden blocks on the rug. Nia attempted to set up a small college savings account for her daughter, wanting to deposit $200 from a freelance consulting gig she had recently completed. The online banking platform declined the application immediately. System error flagged severe credit delinquency. Nia stared at the red text on her screen and felt a cold knot form in her stomach. She called the customer support line, assuming a technical error had occurred with her social security number. The representative's voice was polite, clinical, and devastating. 4 defaulted credit accounts, 2 personal loans in collection, and a notice of tax lien. Nia sat frozen at her kitchen table while the agent read off dates and amounts. Every transaction matched a period when she had been caring for Chloe at home. Every signature bore a digital trace linked to Marcus's office server. She confronted him that evening when he returned to the apartment. He was standing near the refrigerator pouring a glass of sparkling water, composed, unbothered, like a man who had anticipated this exact conversation and rehearsed his responses months in advance. "I restructured our assets to protect our tax exposure, Nia," he said calmly, not even looking up from his phone. "You have been out of the industry for 3 years. You do not understand the current commercial landscape, so stop being paranoid." Nia looked at him, really looked at him, and the illusion shattered completely. She did not see a protective husband or a devoted father. She saw a calculated risk profile, the exact pattern of financial manipulation she used to identify in corporate audits. Controlled isolation, total asset concealment, artificial dependence. She had written reports about executive misconduct that mirrored his exact methods. She packed 1 large suitcase that night while Marcus slept in the master bedroom. She dressed Chloe in her heavy winter coat, placed her vintage metal calculator in her side pocket, and folded her Columbia MBA diploma into the interior lining of her leather tote. She left not because the piece of paper possessed monetary value, but because it was the last physical proof that she had once been an independent woman. The front door clicked shut at 4:15 in the morning, a faint sound that marked the end of a comfortable life and the beginning of a terrifying, uncertain struggle. Chloe slept against Nia's shoulder on the city bus, her small body shivering slightly against the cold February wind that whistled through the door seals. Streetlights cast long orange lines across the bus floor like a ledger sheet Nia could not balance. She attempted to retain legal counsel immediately. She contacted 6 different family law practices in Brooklyn and Manhattan during her first week away. Every single firm declined representation. Conflict of interest, they stated politely. Marcus's development group retained 3 of the largest legal practices in the city, effectively locking her out of affordable institutional representation. The legal network Nia had spent her career admiring turned its back on her as if her credentials had vanished into thin air. 4 months passed like 4 years spent underwater. Nia submitted job applications relentlessly every single morning after dropping Chloe at a temporary community daycare center. She applied for entry-level financial analyst roles, bookkeeper positions, and administrative assistant jobs. Hiring managers saw Columbia Business School at the top of her resume, then noted the 3-year employment gap, then ran a standard credit check. When the red flags appeared on her financial report, every single door slammed shut in her face. They stayed at a family shelter in East New York for 7 weeks, sharing a narrow room with 2 metal cots and a squeaky radiator. When that placement expired, they spent 18 days on a fold-out couch in a classmate's cramped apartment until the building lease permitted no additional guests. Nia sold her grandmother's silver tea set at a pawn shop on Fulton Street. The shop owner offered $320 for metal that held 3 generations of family history. Nia accepted the cash without arguing, using every cent to purchase fresh fruit, winter boots for Chloe, and monthly transit passes. She skipped her own meals 4 days a week, so Chloe could have 3 full plates every day. One night at the shelter, Chloe looked up from her thin pillow and touched her mother's cheek. "Are we playing the camping game again tonight, Mommy?" she asked, with a small smile. Nia held her daughter close against her chest and pressed her face into the collar of a donated wool sweater so the child would not feel her tears. "Yes, my sweet girl," Nia whispered into the dark room, "just a little more camping." 3 weeks later, Nia sat on a cold park bench while Chloe played near the jungle gym. She pulled the Columbia diploma from her bag and unfolded the heavy parchment paper. She stared at the raised university seal, the gold foil, her full name printed in dark calligraphy. Gwendolyn's voice felt distant now, fading like a weak radio signal on a highway. "Knowledge is the one asset nobody can repossess from you." Yet a man had repossessed her savings, a system had denied her housing, a credit report had destroyed her career trajectory. And this piece of paper could not buy a gallon of milk, could not pay a security deposit, and could not guarantee her daughter a warm bed. For the first time in her life, Nia doubted her grandmother's wisdom. She folded the diploma slowly, slid it back into her tote, took Chloe's small hand, and walked toward the Brooklyn Social Services building on Fulton Street. Not because she lacked pride, but because she had exhausted every single alternative, every savings account, and every ounce of personal strength she possessed. The Brooklyn Social Services building on Fulton Street smelled of industrial floor disinfectant and stale vending machine coffee. Fluorescent light tubes hummed continuously overhead, 2 of them near the back exit, flickering in an erratic rhythm that gave Nia a dull headache. Long rows of scuffed blue plastic chairs were bolted directly to the concrete floor, arranged in tight rows like seating in a neglected train terminal. A digital ticket dispenser sat mounted on a metal pole near the entrance glass doors. Its red LED display currently blinked, serving number 114. Nia pulled a small paper slip from the roll. Number 162. She calculated the processing rate in her head based on the 4 open windows. 3 hours and 45 minutes minimum wait time. She led Chloe toward 2 open seats against the far brick wall and sat down quietly. Chloe looked around the vast room with wide brown eyes, taking in the chipped paint, the water-stained ceiling tiles, and the exhausted security guard leaning against the intake counter. "Is this a doctor's office, Mommy?" Chloe asked, swinging her legs beneath the plastic chair. "No, my sweet girl," Nia said gently, smoothing her daughter's hair. "We are just waiting for our turn to speak with someone." Chloe accepted the answer without further inquiry, pulling a half-used pencil and a blank notepad from her jacket pocket. She began drawing a small house with a large yellow sun above the chimney. Nia reached into her bag and retrieved the official application packet. Gray paper, tiny font, endless checkboxes that reduced a human existence to numerical values in zero-sum columns. Social security number, current residential address. Nia wrote the shelter's address on the line, her fingers tightening around the pen as the ink dried. Monthly income, $0. Employment status, unemployed. Duration of unemployment, 4 months. Reason for departure from last primary residence, domestic financial hardship. It was the bureaucratic euphemism for having every asset systematically drained while you were nursing your infant child. Then her pen arrived at the line asking for highest level of educational attainment. Nia paused. The tip of her black ballpoint pen hovered 2 millimeters above the line. She felt the full weight of her past pressing against her ribs like a physical barrier. She filled in the letters slowly, deliberately, each line sharp and legible. Master of Business Administration, Columbia Business School. Quantitative Asset Management. The text looked surreal on the gray government paper. A Columbia graduate degree embedded within an emergency food assistance application. Two completely different worlds colliding on a single sheet of cheap paper. It felt like wearing an expensive formal gown to a building demolition site. Sitting 3 chairs down was an elderly man named Elijah Mercer, 58 years old, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark tweed coat that was neatly brushed despite its visible wear around the cuffs. Elijah was the founder and executive director of the Harlem Community Development Fund, a nonprofit foundation dedicated to providing micro-grants and financial education to neighborhood businesses. He was not in the social services building as an applicant. He was there to meet a regional administrator regarding a joint housing initiative his foundation was co-sponsoring. While waiting for the administrator's office door to open, Elijah stood near the side wall holding a cardboard cup of black coffee, observing the crowd with quiet, experienced eyes. He had spent 30 years working in urban development across New York City. He knew how to read the faces in that room. He could distinguish between those who had given up entirely and those who were quietly holding on to every remaining thread of their dignity. Elijah's eyes drifted toward Nia as she leaned over her application forms. He noticed her posture first. Her spine was straight, her shoulders square, her movements disciplined and precise despite the exhaustion visible around her eyes. She wore a tailored wool blazer that had seen better days, but its lapels were clean and meticulously pressed. Then Elijah noticed the object resting on the edge of the plastic seat beside her. A vintage metal mechanical calculator, its casing silver-plated but worn smooth around the numerical keys. Elijah's breath caught in his throat. His hands froze around his paper coffee cup. He knew that exact calculator model. It was an old Texas Instruments desktop model from 30 years ago, the identical unit his own daughter, Maya, had used while studying accounting at Brooklyn College before her life was cut short. Maya had passed away 14 years ago from acute medical complications after an uninsured clinic delayed her primary diagnostic tests. Elijah had built the Harlem Community Development Fund in her memory, channeling his grief into creating financial safety nets for families who fell through the cracks of corporate structures. Seeing that specific calculator sitting on a plastic chair in a welfare office pulled a silent lever deep within his memory. He watched as Nia picked up the calculator to compute her household expenditure ratios for the intake sheet. Her fingers moved across the keys with practiced, hypnotic speed. She was not merely adding basic expenses. She was running a dual-entry variance analysis on a $40 weekly food budget. Elijah stepped closer, his boots making no sound on the worn linoleum floor. He stood near the pillar 4 feet away, his gaze shifting from the metal calculator to the top page of the application folder resting on Nia's lap. Written in bold print across the education verification section was Columbia Business School, class of 2017. Elijah's eyes narrowed behind his wire-rimmed glasses. The name at the top of the file read Nia Vance. The name struck Elijah like a physical blow. 8 years ago, while conducting research for the Harlem Fund's foundational charter, Elijah had read a groundbreaking academic paper published in the Columbia Financial Review. The paper was titled Quantitative Risk Assessment in Community Micro-Lending, Mitigating Institutional Bias in Urban Capital Allocation. It was a masterwork of econometric analysis that Elijah had used to structure his foundation's entire lending model. The author of that paper was a brilliant graduate researcher named Nia Vance. Elijah stood motionless in the middle of the crowded waiting room while numbers were called out over the raspy loudspeaker. The woman whose academic research had enabled his foundation to distribute over $4 million in small business loans to minority entrepreneurs was now sitting on a scuffed plastic chair in Brooklyn, calculating whether she could afford fresh milk for her daughter. Number 162, the electronic speaker chimed flatly. Window 4, 62. Nia stood up immediately. She smoothed her blazer, took Chloe's small hand in hers, and picked up her application folder along with the metal calculator. She walked toward window 4 with steady, deliberate steps, refusing to lower her head. Behind the acrylic partition sat a caseworker named Brenda Hawkins. 56 years old, gray hair styled in a short crop, wearing half-moon reading glasses suspended from a beaded chain around her neck. Brenda had worked 19 years behind that specific desk. She had processed over 15,000 case files, long ago developing a thick professional barrier to protect her heart from the relentless daily stream of human tragedy. Brenda reached under the glass divider and took Nia's folder without looking up. Her hands moved with mechanical efficiency, flipping through page 1, checking the Social Security verification, scanning the housing status line. Street address, East New York Family Shelter. Income 0, employment gap 3 years. Brenda turned to page 3, her eyes scanning the education and asset background line out of routine habit. Then her fingers stopped moving. Her hand froze in midair above the red approval stamp. She read the line once. She read it a second time. She adjusted her glasses and leaned closer to the document, as if expecting the ink to dissolve into a clerical error. Then slowly, Brenda lifted her head and looked directly into Nia's face. There was no judgment in Brenda's eyes. There was no bureaucratic indifference or patronizing pity. There was a sharp, piercing recognition that made the air between them feel suddenly heavy. "You are Nia Vance?" Brenda asked, her voice dropping an octave, losing its flat, mechanical tone. "Yes," Nia replied quietly, keeping her chin level. Brenda set the file down on her blotter paper. She removed her reading glasses, set them on the desk, and rubbed the bridge of her nose with 2 fingers. She took a long, quiet breath, the kind of breath a person takes before speaking a truth they have carried for years. 8 years ago, Brenda said, her voice steady but laced with emotion, my youngest sister was trying to launch a small, commercial bakery in Bedford-Stuyvesant. Every traditional commercial bank turned her down. They claimed her credit profile lacked collateral. She was on the verge of losing her life savings. Nia listened, her pulse quickening slightly as the caseworker spoke. She applied to the Harlem Community Development Fund, Brenda continued, looking straight into Nia's eyes. They granted her a $25,000 microloan, based on an innovative risk assessment model that evaluated community character alongside capital. That bakery now employs 7 local residents. Brenda picked up Nia's application file again, holding it with 2 hands like a fragile object. When I asked the foundation officer how they managed to approve loans that traditional banks rejected, Brenda whispered, he told me they used a risk model developed by a Columbia researcher named Nia Vance. I have remembered your name for 8 years. A profound silence descended over the small space around window 4. The surrounding noise of the crowded office, the buzzing lights, the crying infants, the shuffling paper, seemed to fade into the background. The woman who had built the framework that saved Brenda's sister's livelihood was now standing before her, asking for $210 a month in emergency food assistance, because the financial system had been weaponized against her. Brenda felt tears prick the corners of her eyes, but she brushed them away with the back of her wrist before they could fall. She placed her hand flat over Nia's application folder. I sat in that exact chair 24 years ago, Brenda said softly. 3 young children, an empty bank account, and a partner who walked out leaving a stack of unpaid utility bills. I felt like my life was completely over. Nia looked at Brenda, feeling a knot tighten in her throat. People think coming through those doors represents failure, Brenda continued, her voice filled with quiet conviction. It does not. Coming through those doors means you are still fighting for your child. It means you refuse to let a broken situation destroy your family. That is not weakness, Miss Vance. That is the fiercest form of strength there is. Chloe looked up from her mother's side, staring at Brenda through the glass partition. Why is the lady talking so soft, Mommy? Chloe asked innocently. Is she sad? Nia knelt down beside her daughter, wiping a tear from her own eye before it could trail down her cheek. She is not sad, baby, Nia whispered, pressing her forehead against Chloe's. She is remembering something important. Brenda smiled warmly at the little girl, then turned back to Nia, pulling the folder closer to her desk lamp. I am going to process this SNAP application in 8 minutes, Brenda said firmly. I am going to expedite the emergency review code so your benefits are active by tomorrow morning. But that is only the beginning of what needs to happen today. Before Nia could respond, a voice spoke from directly behind her. Excuse me, Miss Vance, the voice said, deep, resonant, and calm. Nia turned around. Standing 2 feet away was Elijah Mercer, holding his dark coat, his wire-rimmed glasses catching the overhead light. He held out his hand with quiet respect. My name is Elijah Mercer, he said gently. I am the director of the Harlem Community Development Fund, and I think you and I have a long conversation to catch up on. Elijah Mercer led Nia and Chloe out of the crowded social services office into the quiet courtyard outside, where cold winter sunlight filtered through the bare branches of oak trees. They sat on a green wooden bench near the brick entryway, while Chloe happily chased sparrows across the stone pavers. Elijah pulled a dark leather checkbook from his inner coat pocket, unscrewed a fountain pen, and began writing quickly. His hand was steady, his expression filled with intense urgency as he filled in the numerical line. $50,000. He signed his name with a sharp flourish and held the paper out toward Nia. This is a personal grant from my private account, Elijah said softly, looking directly into her eyes. It is not tied to the foundation. You do not need to explain anything. You do not need to repay a single cent, and you do not need to feel indebted to anyone. Take your daughter out of that shelter today. Rent a comfortable apartment and give yourself room to breathe. Nia looked at the piece of paper resting between Elijah's fingers. $50,000, written in clean blue ink. It was more money than she had seen in 4 months. It represented instant safety, warm beds, fresh clothes, and an immediate escape from the crushing weight of public assistance queues. Her fingers twitched slightly against her lap, but she did not reach out to take it. She looked at the check, then looked up into Elijah's eyes, her jaw setting into a firm, unyielding line. No, Mr. Mercer, Nia said, her voice quiet, but checkbook away. Elijah blinked in surprise, holding the paper still. Miss Vance, you are sleeping in a shelter with a 5-year-old child. You have zero income and ruined credit through no fault of your own. This is not charity from a stranger. This is a bridge. I do not need a bridge built on pity, Mr. Mercer, Nia replied, her eyes flashing with absolute conviction. I walked into that office today to claim the public emergency assistance my tax dollars funded when I was earning 6 figures. I did not come here seeking a benefactor to hand me a direct check because he feels sorry for my situation. Elijah stared at her, caught off guard by the sheer intensity of her dignity. My grandmother worked 32 years scrubbing hospital floors, Nia continued, her voice rising slightly with unshakable pride. She taught me that true independence is never gifted by a wealthy man's pen. If I accept your $50,000 today, I validate the very narrative my ex-husband constructed, that I am helpless, incapable, and reliant on male rescue. I do not need your money. I need my career back. Elijah held her gaze for 10 long seconds. The silence between them grew thick, broken only by the distant hum of Brooklyn traffic and Chloe's faint laughter. Slowly, a profound respect washed over Elijah's face. He nodded once, folded the check in half, and returned it to his coat pocket. Forgive me, Miss Vance, Elijah said quietly, bowing his head slightly. I let my emotions cloud my respect for your strength. You are completely right. He unbuttoned his coat, reached into his briefcase, and pulled out a clean white folder stamped with the Harlem Community Development Fund emblem. Let us speak as professional colleagues then, Elijah said, his tone shifting entirely to a crisp professional cadence. The Harlem Fund is expanding its urban housing initiative next month. We need a senior portfolio risk analyst to evaluate complex development models and oversee capital distribution across 32 commercial properties in Upper Manhattan. Nia leaned back, watching him closely. What are the requirements? The candidate must possess an advanced degree in quantitative finance, an expert understanding of institutional risk, and absolute personal integrity, Elijah said, opening the file. The annual salary is $58,000. It is a fraction of what you earned on Wall Street, but it includes comprehensive medical coverage for you and Chloe, a stable institutional platform, and complete professional autonomy. Nia looked at the job description printed on the institutional letterhead. $58,000 a year. It was less than a third of her former corporate compensation, but every single dollar would be earned through her intellect, her labor, and her specialized expertise. When do I start? Nia asked, her voice steady. Monday morning at 8 o'clock, Elijah replied, offering his hand once more. Not as a gesture of rescue, but as an agreement between equals. Nia took his hand and shook it firmly. 3 days later, Nia unlocked the door to a small one-bedroom apartment on the third floor of a brick building on 138th Street in Harlem. The unit was 420 square feet. The hardwood floors squeaked near the kitchen sink, the radiator hissed like an angry teapot when the heat kicked on, and the single living room window looked out over a gravel alleyway. It held no velvet curtains and no panoramic views of Central Park, but possessed solid steel deadbolt, a heavy brass key that resided inside Nia's coat pocket, and a small white card slide into the doorbell panel that read Vance. Chloe ran inside like an explorer entering a newly discovered kingdom. She climbed onto the single queen-sized mattress resting on the bedroom floor and bounced 3 times, her arms spread wide toward the ceiling. "Is this our forever camping house, Mommy?" Chloe asked, her face glowing with pure excitement. Nia walked over, sat on the edge of the mattress, and pulled her daughter into her arms. "This is our home, baby," Nia whispered, kissing Chloe's forehead. "No more camping." The following morning, Nia received her approved SNAP electronic benefit card in the mail. $210 a month for a 2-person household. It broke down to precisely $7 a day, or $3.50 per person per day. Every single purchase required mathematical precision. Nia walked to the public library on 125th Street, while Chloe was settled in her new community preschool program. She sat down at a free public computer terminal, opened a blank spreadsheet, and began building a master domestic expenditure model. She applied the same quantitative framework she had once used to manage $40 million corporate portfolios to the task of feeding her family on $3.50 a day. Column A tracked unit cost per gram. Column B calculated protein density. Column C analyzed shelf life preservation ratios. At the grocery store on Malcolm X Boulevard, Nia moved through the aisles with total focus. Oats, dried black beans, brown rice, peanut butter, whole milk, frozen spinach, discounted chicken thighs, and fresh apples. She watched the cashier scan each item, monitoring the digital register total, like an analyst watching live stock tickers. 55, the cashier announced, glancing casually at the EBT card in Nia's hand. Nia swiped the card, entered her code, took her paper bags, and walked out into the cold afternoon air with her head held high. She did not feel shame. She felt the quiet, victorious precision of a woman who was taking total control of her domestic reality. That evening, the small apartment smelled of simmering chicken broth and steamed rice. A simple dinner served in 2 matching ceramic bowls Nia had purchased for 50 cents each at a neighborhood thrift store. Chloe sat cross-legged on the floor near the radiator, eating happily while humming a tuneless song she had invented about a small bird that built a nest inside a clock. "Mommy," Chloe said between bites, "does the computer at your new job have games on it?" Nia laughed, a genuine deep laugh that felt as though it unraveled months of tension locked inside her chest. "No, sweet girl," Nia said, stirring her soup. "It has complex financial spreadsheets, but to me those are even better than games." Chloe nodded solemnly, as if this explanation made absolute sense. The yellow lamplight cast a warm glow across the freshly scrubbed floorboards. The radiator clicked rhythmically against the wall. Outside the glass window, Harlem moved with its vibrant, unyielding energy. For the first time in 3 years, Nia felt safe. No spreadsheets were being altered behind her back. No credit lines were being opened in her name without her knowledge. No one was quietly draining her independence while telling her they loved her. She opened her notebook at the small folding table, placed her grandmother's vintage metal calculator beside her coffee mug, and began reviewing the Harlem Fund's property risk files for her morning meeting. Her grandmother's voice returned to her mind, no longer sounding like a distant whisper, but like a clear, powerful melody echoing through the room. "Knowledge is the one asset nobody can repossess from you." Nia touched the smooth metallic keys of the old calculator and smiled into the quiet night. She was no longer merely surviving in the shadows of someone else's life. She was building her own foundation, stone by stone, brick by brick, and no system on earth was going to tear it down. Nia Vance arrived at the Harlem Community Development Fund every morning. At 7:30, 45 minutes before the rest of the staff unlocked their office doors. She wore her single navy wool blazer, cleaned, meticulously pressed, and repaired at the elbow seams with dark silk thread. Her desk held no decorative photographs or personal trinkets, only a high-speed desktop monitor, 3 yellow legal pads, and her grandmother's vintage metal calculator resting beside a white ceramic coffee mug. Within 6 weeks, Nia overhauled the foundation's entire risk analysis protocol. She created a multi-layered quantitative assessment matrix that evaluated small business cash flows with surgical precision, reducing application review times from 3 weeks to 4 days. She worked 14 hours a day, balancing her professional duties with picking up Chloe from preschool and preparing balanced dinners calculated strictly down to the penny. During her second month, while auditing a proposed $2 million commercial development grant for a multifamily housing project in Washington Heights, Nia's analytical instincts sounded an alarm. The primary contractor's corporate filings appeared clean on the surface, but Nia noticed a minor accounting discrepancy in the secondary shell company's tax identification numbers. She spent 3 consecutive nights at her small folding kitchen table, analyzing 3 years of public land registries and corporate tax filings using her public library access card. She uncovered an elaborate asset stripping scheme designed to funnel $2 million of the foundation's grant money into an offshore account registered in New Jersey. Nia presented her 42-page forensic report to Elijah Mercer and the foundation's board of directors on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. The board members, accustomed to dry financial summaries, sat in stunned silence as Nia systematically dismantled the contractor's fraudulent structure line by line. "You did not merely save this foundation $2 million nor, Miss Vance," Elijah said quietly after the meeting concluded, looking at her with immense gratitude. "You saved our reputation and guaranteed that 32 working-class families will actually have safe housing next year." Yet, as Nia's professional footing stabilized, the shadows of her past rushed back to engulf her. On a Thursday morning in early May, a court process server walked into the Harlem Fund's reception area and handed Nia a thick manila envelope. Marcus Vance had filed an emergency motion for full legal and physical custody of Chloe in Manhattan Family Court. The petition was brutal, calculated, and framed with devastating legal rhetoric. Marcus's high-priced legal team argued that Nia was emotionally unstable, financially negligent, and unfit to parent. They submitted her shelter intake records, her 4-month unemployment gap, and her ruined credit score as sworn evidence of parental incompetence. Attached to the filing was a formal settlement offer: surrender all future claims to marital assets, sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding his business practices, and he would grant her supervised visitation rights twice a month. Nia sat at her desk holding the legal notice, her hands trembling violently. The room seemed to tilt beneath her feet as cold sweat broke out across her forehead. Marcus was attempting to use the very destruction he had engineered to steal her daughter away forever. She walked into the bathroom, locked the door, splashed cold water on her face, and looked into the mirror. She saw the exhaustion around her eyes, but beneath the fatigue, she saw something else: a fierce, unyielding flame that no legal threat could extinguish. "I am done running," Nia whispered to her reflection in the glass. She declined the Legal Aid Society's offer for a junior staff attorney, deciding to act as co-counsel alongside a veteran public interest lawyer named Reginald Cole. For 3 weeks, Nia slept no more than 3 hours a night. While Chloe slept peacefully in the adjacent room, Nia transformed her 420-square-foot apartment into a financial warfare room. She requested 5 years of joint bank statements, tax returns, property deeds, and corporate credit filings through discovery motions. She cross-referenced thousands of digital transaction stamps, tracing every decimal point Marcus had shifted while she was home nursing Chloe. Using her specialized quantitative training, she built an undeniable color-coded forensic accounting portfolio that mapped Marcus's systemic asset fraud. The courtroom hearing took place on the 14th floor of the New York State Supreme Court building in Lower Manhattan. The room was sterile and imposing, lit by harsh fluorescent panels that hummed faintly against the high plaster ceiling. Marcus sat at the defense table on the right side of the room, flanked by 3 senior partners from one of Wall Street's most prestigious litigation firms. He wore a $3,500 custom charcoal suit, a gold luxury watch gleaming under the overhead lights, and an expression of calm, aristocratic confidence. He looked every bit the successful commercial developer who held all the cards. Nia sat at the left table beside Reginald Cole. She wore her $12 Navy thrift store blazer, her hair pulled back into a neat, disciplined bun. Her table held no high-end leather briefcases, only 3 thick black binders organized with obsessive precision, and her grandmother's vintage silver calculator resting beside her pad. Judge Catherine Thornton presided over the bench, a stern, gray-haired jurist known throughout the district for her zero-tolerance policy toward court theatricals. Marcus's lead attorney took the podium first, speaking for 45 minutes with practiced eloquence. He painted a picture of a devoted, successful father seeking to rescue his daughter from a mother who had dragged the child through homeless shelters, public assistance queues, and financial ruin. He held up Nia's credit report like a toxic document, emphasizing the 63,500 in defaulted debt. When the defense concluded, Reginald Cole stood up, adjusted his coat, and looked at the bench. "Your Honor," Cole said calmly, "my client, Miss Nia Vance, will present the financial evidence regarding parental stability and asset management herself." Marcus's lead attorney smirked slightly, leaning back in his leather chair. Marcus did not even bother to look across the aisle. Nia stood up smoothly. Her spine was straight, her shoulders square, her voice ringing out through the quiet courtroom, like a bell struck in the morning air. "Your Honor," Nia began, her tone measured, clinical, and devoid of emotional desperation. "The defense argues that my client profile reflects financial negligence. I present Plaintiff's Exhibit A forensic cash flow reconstruction covering the 48 months of our marriage." Nia opened the first black binder and began her presentation. For 2 hours, she transformed the courtroom into a masterclass in forensic asset tracking. Using clear, mathematically bulletproof data projections, she demonstrated how Marcus had opened 4 separate corporate lines of credit using her social security number without her knowledge, forging her digital signature from his office IP address on March 14, October 22, and January 9. She displayed bank transfer logs showing how $340,000 in marital equity, liquidated from her personal Wall Street stock options and joint real estate holdings, had been systematically funneled into a private shell company registered in Delaware, where Marcus was the sole beneficiary. She pulled up credit bureau records proving that every single defaulted account listed on her report was generated by unauthorized corporate charges executed while she was on maternity leave caring for their child. Marcus's smirk evaporated. His hands clenched tightly into fists against the mahogany table. His lead attorney began shuffling frantically through his papers, leaning over to whisper urgently into his client's ear. Nia did not stop. She turned to the final section of her binder, her voice growing even sharper, even more precise. "Furthermore, Your Honor," Nia stated, stepping closer to the judicial bench, "a cross-reference of these Delaware shell accounts with New York State commercial property filings reveals that Mr. Vance used these stolen marital funds to secure personal equity stakes in 2 commercial developments in Queens, failing to declare these assets on his sworn financial disclosure forms to this court." Judge Thornton leaned forward over her bench, her sharp eyes scanning the forensic spreadsheets Nia had submitted. The judge's face turned to stone as she reviewed the digital IP trail and signature verifications. "Is this documentation accurate, Counselor?" Judge Thornton asked, her voice cold as steel as she looked down at Marcus's lead attorney. The defense counsel stood up slowly, his face drained of color. We request a brief recess to review these filings, Your Honor," he stammered, no longer looking at his client. "Request denied," Judge Thornton snapped, slamming her gavel down with a sharp, echoing crack that resonated through the entire chamber. The judge looked across the courtroom at Marcus Vance, her expression filled with profound disdain. "Mr. Vance," Judge Thornton declared, "you have committed systematic marital fraud, submitted perjured financial disclosures to this court, and weaponized your own criminal financial conduct to strip a mother of her child. This court finds your actions not merely morally repugnant, but blatantly illegal." Judge Thornton turned her attention to Nia, her expression softening into one of deep respect. "Miss Vance," the judge said warmly, "you have presented one of the most brilliant, flawless forensic financial demonstrations I have witnessed in 22 years on the bench." The judge issued her ruling immediately from the bench. Marcus Vance was ordered to surrender full legal and physical custody of Chloe to Nia, with restricted, supervised visitation rights. He was mandated to return $340,000 in stolen marital assets within 30 days, assume total legal responsibility for liquidating all $63,500 in fraudulent debts, and pay all court fees. Furthermore, Judge Thornton referred Marcus's financial filings to the district attorney's office for formal criminal fraud investigation. Nia sat down at her table. She did not scream, she did not cheer, and she did not shed a single tear in front of Marcus Vance. She simply folded her hands over her binder, closed her grandmother's vintage calculator, and let the quiet warmth of total victory wash over her soul. Outside the courthouse steps, cold winter air greeted her. Reginald Cole turned to her with a wide smile. "You didn't just win your daughter back today, Nia," he said proudly. You set a legal precedent that will protect hundreds of women facing financial abuse in this city." Nia looked up at the Manhattan sky, where the sun was breaking through gray clouds, casting golden light across the stone pillars. She pulled her phone from her pocket and dialed the Harlem preschool. "Hi, this is Nia Vance," she said, her voice filled with pure, unshakable joy. "I'm coming to pick up my daughter." 6 months after the landmark court ruling, Nia and Chloe moved into a bright two-bedroom apartment on the fourth floor of a classic brownstone on 141st Street in Harlem. It held solid oak floors that gleamed in the afternoon sun, built-in bookshelves painted white, and a spacious kitchen with a wide windowsill. Small potted herbs thrived in the morning light. There were no gilded mirrors, no high-rise glass views, and no luxury concierge desks. But the front door featured a solid brass deadbolt, a mailbox downstairs bearing a neat label reading Vance, and a lease agreement registered under a single signature, Nia Vance. Chloe carried her own small cardboard box into her new bedroom on moving day. She walked around the room slowly, touching the smooth cream-colored walls, opening her closet door twice and looking out the window at the vibrant tree-lined street below. Then she pulled a drawing from her backpack, a picture drawn with colored pencils, showing a mother and daughter holding hands in front of a warm brown house with a yellow sun, and taped it securely to her bedroom door. "Is this our forever house now, Mommy?" Chloe asked, looking up with wide, hopeful eyes. Nia knelt beside her daughter, smoothing the edges of the drawing against the wood. "This is our permanent foundation, sweet girl," Nia whispered, holding Chloe close. "Nobody can ever take this away from us." At the Harlem Community Development Fund, Nia's career expanded with extraordinary momentum. Following her successful uncovering of the grant fraud scheme and her brilliant court demonstration, the board of directors unanimously appointed her executive director of the foundation's newly established Financial Protection and Capital Empowerment Division. The division was created specifically around Nia's vision, combining micro-lending for minority entrepreneurs with specialized legal financial defense resources for women experiencing domestic economic abuse. The annual salary was $95,000, a comfortable, honest income earned entirely through her intellect and dedication to community uplift. Every single dollar was deposited into an account bearing her name alone, controlled by no one, owed to no one. It was the wealthiest she had ever felt in her entire life. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon, Nia sat at her desk reviewing intake files when her assistant ushered in her first client of the day. A 29-year-old woman named Danielle stepped into the office, holding her 4-year-old son by the hand. Danielle's eyes were lowered, her shoulders hunched inward, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She looked like a woman who had been told so many times that she was helpless that she had begun to accept it as an absolute truth. Her husband had systematically drained her savings, blocked her job applications, and left her facing eviction with ruined credit. Nia did not stay behind her mahogany executive desk. She stood up immediately, walked across the room, and sat down on a chair directly opposite Danielle, eye to eye, level to level. "I sat in your exact chair 18 months ago," Nia said softly, her voice filled with quiet, unshakable strength. "I had a 5-year-old daughter on my lap, $0 in my bank account, and a system telling me I had failed. But a woman behind a desk looked at me and reminded me who I was. Now I am here to do the same for you." Danielle looked up, her eyes catching Nia's steady gaze, and for the first time in months the heavy shadow of resignation lifted from her face. 2 weeks later, Nia walked back into the Brooklyn Social Services Building on Fulton Street. The fluorescent lights still hummed overhead, the blue plastic chairs remained scuffed and bolted to the floor, and the digital dispenser still chimed red numbers into the crowded air. Nia was not carrying an application folder. She held 2 large insulated cups of fresh dark roast coffee and a box of warm pastries from a local Harlem bakery. Brenda Hawkins looked up from behind window 4, her silver-framed reading glasses resting on her nose, when she saw Nia standing there, dressed in a sleek charcoal wool suit with her chin held high, a radiant smile spread across the elder woman's face. They sat together on a bench in the quiet courtyard outside during Brenda's break, sharing coffee and watching the winter sunlight settle over the city. "You didn't just rebuild your life, Nia," Brenda said softly, tearing a piece of pastry. "You proved that the human spirit cannot be repossessed by spreadsheets and legal threats." "I didn't rebuild it alone," Brenda, Nia replied, placing her hand gently over the elder woman's hand. "You saw me when I was invisible. You reminded me that asking for help was not defeat, but the fiercest form of courage." Brenda looked away, wiping a small tear from her eye, her face filled with profound fulfillment. The following Saturday, Nia, Chloe, and Elijah Mercer gathered at a small community garden on 135th Street. Elijah stood near a newly built wooden arbor, watching Chloe paint small wooden plant markers with bright yellow flowers. For 14 years, Elijah had carried the crushing weight of grief over his daughter Maya's passing, believing that his foundation could only offer temporary bandages to systemic wounds. But watching Nia transform her trauma into an unshakable fortress of protection for hundreds of families gave him a sense of peace he had not known in over a decade. "You gave this foundation its true soul, Nia," Elijah said gently, looking at the bustling garden around them. "Maya would have been so proud to stand beside you." "She stands beside us every day, Elijah," Nia said softly, touching his arm. "In every door we open for someone who thinks all doors are closed." Nia Vance walked into a public assistance office on a cold winter morning, holding a Columbia MBA diploma tucked inside her bag and her 5-year-old daughter holding her hand. She thought she had lost everything: her career, her home, her savings, her credit, and her faith in the promises her grandmother had pressed into her bones since childhood. But she was wrong. She had not lost her education. She had merely forgotten that knowledge is not a passive shield you wear for decoration. It is an active tool you pick up, a blade you forge, a weapon you choose to wield when the world attempts to break your spirit. It protects nothing on its own until you decide to stand up and use it fiercely. She had not lost her dignity. She had merely forgotten that stepping through a public assistance door to fight for your child is not weakness. Sitting on a scuffed plastic chair and filling out a form for emergency aid is not the end of your story. It is the bravest, most resilient chapter in it. She did not need a billionaire hero. She did not need a miraculous stroke of luck. She needed an opportunity grounded in justice, a caseworker who saw her humanity, an advocate who offered a platform instead of a handout, and the unyielding courage to stand up in a courtroom and reclaim her life. The caseworker looked at her file and froze, not because the situation was impossible, but because the spirit before her was unshakable. Poverty is not a flaw of character. It is a temporary circumstance, and circumstances can be rewritten whenever human beings choose to see each other, uphold each other's dignity, and build bridges of real opportunity. Nia Vance did not merely survive her storm. She built a new foundation, opened doors for those walking behind her, and proved once and for all that true dignity, once awakened, can never be repossessed.